What's up everyone, it's Colin from DIY Guy, and today we're getting rid of those kitchen scraps and building our own vermicomposter DIY style, aka the worm bin. Let's get into it. So the last few days I've been looking into composting and just trying to figure out how to speed up my compost, especially in the winter time. Everything's cold, you know, nature doesn't really do its thing very quickly when it's cold. And then I came across vermicomposting and saw that worms can actually eat their weight in food every day, or kitchen scraps. And I thought, wow, if I had 10 pounds of kitchen scraps in a week, they would pretty much demolish that. And so I did some research and I found that vermicomposters run like anywhere from $70 to $200 depending on how big or how nice a one you get. Some of them have crazy bells and whistles. It's like 5 trays with a drain and a tap and like multi-level air conditioning units and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well that's a little much. I don't need that. I'm not trying to like give these worms a 5-star vacation or anything. Then I thought to myself, surely there is a way with my master's in engineering that I can come up with a way to build a vermicomposter for less than $70. And so off I go to Home Depot. My sanctuary of ideas, it's where I just go wander around and figure out DIY projects and just see what I want to spend money on that I don't have money for, you know? I walk into Home Depot with this design in mind. It's called the Bathtub Design. I'll throw it on the screen. And it's called the Bathtub Design because it's just basically a bin that you throw all your stuff in, all your compost material, and then you throw the worms in and they do their thing. And you have compost, or black gold as they call it. I walk in, I buy this 17-gallon Tupperware container for $15, a bag of perlite for $7. The perlite is just to kind of break up the soil and also give the worms something gritty to chew on, helps with their digestive system. And then the last thing I bought was an $8 drain valve. Now, this is unnecessary. If you manage your moisture levels, then you don't actually need a drain, but I figure worst case scenario, I get some water in the bottom and it's just easier to drain than dumping all my worms out. Now we get to the fun part where we actually get to build it. A little disclaimer here, to build the bin was $30 at Home Depot, but then I had to buy these worms from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, and they were about $27 for 250 worms, which I thought was kind of expensive for worms, but beggars can't be choosers. So it was actually $27 plus $8 shipping, I believe, so $35. Fortunately, I read that these worms actually double in population about every 90 days. Before long, I should have an entire farm of worms, even though I only started with 250. Now I've got a few things behind me. I've got the Tupperware container for my compost bin. I've got the worms, perlite, compost bucket, and just regular dirt bucket. This dirt is actually trash. It's from my crawl space, and I thought, well, if anything can save it, these worm castings can, so we'll try it out. And then finally, I've just got a box of shredded paper. I actually did this all by hand. I don't have a paper shredder, but I took newspapers, cardboard rolls, cardboard itself, and I just cut it up into little pieces. I've got 2 boxes of it just to make sure I have enough. The last thing I've got is this cardboard lid. This is actually going to go inside the bin just to act as a deterrent and keep the worms from climbing out of the edges of the bucket. So let's go ahead and build this thing. All right, just to show you the inside of the box, it's really simple. It's just a Tupperware container, and then I attached on the front this valve. I just put a couple of screws in there and used some JB Weld to fasten it. And then, see if you can see that, I've got a screen that I put over the valve hole just so the worms don't climb out on accident. Now I'm basically going to do this in layers. First I'm going to start on the bottom with just a thin layer of leaves to kind of fill in those ridges. That way it's just easier to clean and the worms don't hang out in the ridges too much. This will also act a little bit as a bedding layer, just in case the worms get all the way down there, and it'll decompose over time. It'll just add some carbon to the nitrogen that is all the kitchen scraps. Next thing I'm going to do is add a layer of junk dirt, and this is just kind of fill dirt that I hope will be composted into fertility, ideally. And then on top of that, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of perlite just to give it some air pockets. I'll sprinkle it pretty generously and then mix it up a little bit. And now I'm going to add a compost layer. The compost layer is kind of going to serve as some temporary food. I'm actually going to wait a week before I add any new kitchen scraps just so they can get all this cleaned up. That way it doesn't start to stink and rot. You definitely don't want to add more food than your worms can eat in a week because it will start to stink. And also it'll have a lot of moisture in there, which will just get gross at the bottom. Next I'm going to add a generous amount of paper clippings as the worm bedding. Now I'm just going to repeat the layering I just did before. Now the last thing I do before I add the worms is just wet down the insides of the bin. So worms actually breathe through their skin, and if they dry out, then they're gonna die. So I wanna make it about the moisture level of a wrung out rag. I don't want it to be dripping or anything. Now it looks like I might have added a lot of water, but there's also a lot of paper in there to absorb this moisture. Now we finally get to the fun part where we get to dump the worms in. So like I said, these are from Jim's Worm Farm, and these are the red wigglers. I got the pack of 250 for about $27, and I'm hoping they're just gonna multiply, so I'll have plenty of worms in the next few months. So all I'm gonna do is dump these straight into the bucket. Oh my gosh, look at that. That is so weird. Oh my gosh, they're going nuts. Oh, that feels so crazy. Oh, it's so weird. These guys are gonna tear through this compost. Make sure I get all of them out. No man left behind. Okay, that was the weirdest experience I've ever had, just holding those worms in my hand. That was so weird. I didn't actually like it. The only reason I appreciate these guys and I'm not grossed out by them is because I know what they can do. I know they're great composters, and since I love gardening and they're good at gardening, I gotta love them. Now I'm gonna leave the top off for a little while. I'm not gonna put my cardboard cover on yet. I wanna let the light shine on them. That way they push farther into the compost and kind of do their work. So there's a lot of compost in here. It doesn't stink or anything. It's been sitting outside for a while. And so I'm gonna give them about a week before I feed them again. And I'll probably sift through the compost just to see if there's any big chunks left before I feed them with new stuff. Now worms are kind of like us, oddly enough. I actually heard somebody say we share like 90% of our DNA with earthworms or something. But anyway, they don't like extreme temperatures. They're kind of like you and I. If it's like really cold outside, we're not gonna be very active outside. If it's really hot outside, we're not gonna be very active outside. And so these worms are gonna be the busiest when they're in that 50 to 70 degree range. That's their happy place. So at this point in the video, you might be wondering, how do we harvest the worm castings with this design? Well, it's not a fancy one like the $200 ones where you just pull out a tray and dump the castings, but it's still very easy. So when it comes time to harvest in a few months, we're gonna take the new compost that we have and only put it on one half of the bin. This is gonna force all the worms to migrate toward the food, and then we're gonna be able to empty out the castings from the empty side. And then we're gonna repeat the process on the other side. So it'll just be a two-stage thing instead of a all at once sort of deal. Now the last tip I wanna leave you with is not to overfeed your worms. That's the biggest mistake I saw people talk about online. If you overfeed your worms, then they can't keep up with their composting and it just starts to rot and stink. So that's gross and we don't want that. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate it. It helps out my channel a lot. Finally, I just wanted to let you know that I absolutely love this channel. This is super fun to me. I get to learn so much, and I had no idea what vermicomposting was before this week. So with that, take care, get outside if you can, and keep growing it yourself.